Landing a position with the acclaimed charity group, often referred to as the Angel Providers, was a dream come true for Sarah. Although the organization could only offer a meager stipend, she eagerly accepted the terms. She believed that working alongside such selfless individuals was far more rewarding than chasing a high corporate salary. Over the years, this dedicated group has continued to provide essential healthcare to impoverished communities worldwide, relying heavily on passionate workers who value purpose over financial gain. In terms of your own communication skills, it is important to give just as much of your attention to a message you are receiving as to one you are giving. Listening, for example, as well as being a method for gathering information, can convey your interest in what the other person is concerned with. This in itself can have a positive effect on your relationship with them, and if you are their manager, their motivation. Asking questions for clarification of the detail of the message can also convey that you have understood the message and that you want to, appropriately.
Sleepwalking is a disorder that occurs during sleep, in which a person may get up and walk around. It usually happens at certain times of the night, especially during the deeper stages of sleep. People who sleepwalk are not aware of their actions and often do not remember what they have done when they wake up. Sleepwalking is more common in children than in adults, and many children grow out of it over time. Sleepwalking is not the only type of unusual sleep behavior. Others include sleep talking, nightmares, and night terrors.
Housing is a key component of individual and family. In addition to being a place where family and friends can gather, housing is important for a sense of security and privacy. One significant aspect of security is the wealth in the homes of owner-occupiers. The wealth of households increases as the wealth or equity in the homes of owner-occupiers increases through paying off outstanding housing loans or as property values rise. In 2003-04, the primary residence was, on average, the most valuable asset of owner-occupier households, with the net value of owned homes accounting for an average of 55% of the net worth of those households.
York was once a rich and populous city. Many houses blocked the narrow streets in the district, creating crowded living conditions. Records also show details about daily life, including the number of meals served every day. Religious festivals are held in St. Mary's Church, which remain an important part of York's traditions.
For our purposes, the words invention and innovation can be used interchangeably. More specifically, however, the term invention refers to the discovery of new products or processes, while innovation refers to the commercialization, bringing to the market of new products or processes. Furthermore, we can distinguish between product innovations and process innovations. Product innovations result in the production of a new product, such as the change from a three-wheel car to a four-wheel car, or the change from LP records to CD. Process innovations increase the efficiency of the methods of production of existing products, for example, the invention of the assembler line technique. The inventions and innovations that form industrial revolutions are those that open new doors and create new ways of doing things, not simply those that fill gaps in existing ways of doing things. Mocker, 1997. The core of the first industrial revolution in the 18th century was a succession of technological changes that brought about material advances in three basic areas. 1. The substitution of mechanical devices, such as machines, for human labor. 2. The substitution of inanimate sources of power, such as steam, for animate sources of power, such as horsepower. And 3. The substitution of mineral raw materials for vegetable or animal substances, and in general the use of new and more abundant raw materials.
portraiture played an important role in the Elizabethan era. Queen Elizabeth's portraits conveyed the regal image of a powerful monarch, the steadfast, ageless force behind England. Owning paintings of the Queen was viewed as a status symbol. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, displayed over 50 paintings at his castle in Kenilworth, Warwickshire, a bold reminder to guests that he was the man closest to the Queen. Although Elizabethan artists drew inspiration from the European Renaissance, it was Elizabeth herself who was the national preoccupation. Invoking her image in paintings and literature had the effect of elevating them to a higher level. Today, we like to think of art as an expression of feelings and beliefs. But in Elizabethan England, flattery was the order of the day, a time when most artists needed wealthy sponsors to survive.
Folklore, a modern term for the body of traditional customs, superstitions, stories, dances, and songs that have been adopted and maintained within a given community by processes of repetition, is not reliant on the written word. Along with folk songs and folktales, this broad category of cultural forms embraces all kinds of legends, riddles, jokes, proverbs, games, charms, omens, spells, and rituals, especially those of pre-literate societies or social classes. Those forms of verbal expression that are handed on from one generation or locality to the next by word of mouth are said to constitute an oral tradition. Children have sound sleep patterns. They can soundly sleep for 8-9 hours and get up at a fixed time, but teenagers don't. Their sleep patterns are influenced by their erratic schedules, in which they sometimes have more classes but sometimes have fewer. Despite these factors, they actually need longer sleep, and insufficient sleep may be responsible for their learning problems.
The exponential growth of the internet was heralded in the 1990s as revolutionizing the production and dissemination of information. Some people saw the internet as a means of democratizing access to knowledge. For people concerned with African development, it seemed to offer the possibility, leapfrogging over the technology gap that separates Africa from advanced industrialized countries.
Barry Finnings, a professor at Monash University's College of Pharmacy in Melbourne, and PhD student Anita Schneider recently tested a new wrinkle cure. Twice daily, 20 male and female volunteers applied a liquid containing myxinol, a patented extract of Ochra hibiscus esculentus seed, to one side of their faces. On the other side, they applied a similar liquid without myxinol. Every week for a month, their wrinkles were tested by self-assessment, photography, and the size of depressions made in silicone molds. The results were impressive. After a month, the depth and number of wrinkles on the myxinol-treated side were reduced by approximately 27%, but Finnan's research, commissioned by a cosmetics company, is unlikely to be published in a scientific publication. It's hard to even find studies that show the active ingredients in cosmetics penetrate the skin, let alone more comprehensive research on their effects. Even when rigorous studies are commissioned, companies usually control whether the work is published in the traditional scientific literature.
Antarctic plants can be important indicators of subtle changes in environmental conditions, including climate change. Traditional ground-based assessments of vegetation health are, however, not ideal in Antarctica, as they can destroy the vegetation and are physically demanding in the harsh weather conditions. Co-author Professor Sharon Robinson from U School of Biological Sciences said the study found drone-based monitoring of vegetation health produced similar results to traditional techniques, but with much greater efficiency and with no damage to the vegetation. Drones are a powerful tool for monitoring fragile Antarctic vegetation, Professor Robinson said. They could be used to provide timely warnings about specific environmental stress events. as well as monitoring the longer-term impacts of climate change. These methods could also be adapted to monitor the health of other small-stature, patchy plant communities, including in alpine or desert regions. The researchers found that drones, equipped with sensors, were able to detect vegetation health indicators more accurately than satellite imagery. Mosses are one of the key Antarctic vegetation types that need to be monitored. However, they tend to occur in patches among rocks, ice, and soil, making it important that the imagery used to assess their health is as accurate and spatially detailed as possible.
Families provide emotional, physical, and financial care and support to their members, and are often the basis on which government assistance is determined and administered. Australians have traditionally experienced three main living arrangements over a life cycle: living with parents, living with a partner, for some of this period with children, and living alone in old age if that partner died. Now and into the future, living arrangements throughout a life cycle may also include living alone or in a group household before perhaps forming a long-term partnership, or living as a only parent or alone after divorce or separation. These changes in living arrangements and family characteristics are the outcome of various demographic and social trends, such as declining fertility, increased rates of divorce, and longer life expectancy. Being able to give a good and clear presentation to a public audience is a skill that you and your future employer will value greatly. Prospective employers invariably ask for your experience in using these key skills during interviews. You need to be able to articulate what makes a good and poor presentation and offer evidence for your knowledge. So, when you are asked to give a talk or produce a poster as part of your studies, recognize the importance of developing the skills of delivery as well as conveying the content. Posters and oral presentations are forms of presentation that enable you to develop your confidence in different ways. Posters check your ability to present information succinctly and present it in an attractive and message-focused way, while oral presentations allow for more information and a more in-depth delivery. In both modes, you will probably find yourself taking questions and explaining your ideas.
Little is known about the figure that inspired the story of King Arthur. While Arthurian legends have been a part of Western literature for centuries, the historical reality of King Arthur remains shrouded in obscurity. The earliest references to a figure resembling Arthur come from various sources, including Welsh, Latin, and later medieval English texts. However, concrete evidence linking Arthur to a specific historical figure is lacking. One of the key figures associated with the Arthurian legend is the 6th century Welsh bard Owain, also known as Ornyd. While Owain himself is an elusive historical figure, his works, particularly his poetry, suggest that he may have played a role in shaping the mythic image of Arthur. Owain's poems are filled with references to heroic warriors and battles, which may have been inspired by real historical events or figures from the tumultuous period of post-Roman Britain. In the context of Arthur, Owain's work might have contributed to the development of the legend of a warrior king who defends his people against invaders. Though Owain's connection to Arthur is speculative, some scholars believe that elements of his poetry could have been woven into later tales of the Arthurian cycle. Whether or not Owain directly inspired the stories of King Arthur, his legacy as a poet and historian of his time remains influential in understanding the origins of these enduring myths.
Jennifer Harris, a researcher at the University of Connecticut's Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, has studied the impact of food advertising on children's eating behaviors. In one key experiment, children aged 7 to 11 watched a cartoon interspersed with either food or non-food advertisements. Afterward, they were given a bowl of cheddar cheese crackers to snack on. The results showed that children exposed to food ads consumed 45% more snacks than those who saw non-food ads. This study suggests that food advertising can significantly increase snack consumption among children, potentially contributing to unhealthy eating habits and obesity. Food ads, often designed with colorful packaging and appealing characters, trigger cravings in children, making them more likely to choose unhealthy, calorie-dense snacks. These advertisements create emotional associations between eating the product and feelings of enjoyment or fun, further encouraging children to indulge. The findings highlight the need for stricter regulations on food advertising targeting children. By reducing exposure to these ads, it may be possible to mitigate their influence and promote healthier eating habits. Harris's research underscores the importance of protecting children from marketing practices that could lead to long-term health issues, such as obesity.
The normal novel is dying. People nowadays prefer to engage in other forms of entertainment, such as music, rather than reading books during their leisure time. However, ironically, a survey conducted by a certain organization or website reveals that the number of potential online writers, particularly in the genre of novels, is continuously increasing. This contradiction highlights the fact that despite the decline in reading books, global literacy rates are at an all-time high. This signals a shift in how people consume and engage with literature. While novels may be losing popularity as a medium, the rise of online writers and the overall improvement in literacy rates underscore the enduring importance and value of written communication. It also challenges the notion that literature is dying and suggests that it is merely evolving to adapt to the preferences and habits of modern readers. In conclusion, the novel, like any other art form, may transform in response to changing times, but is far from fading away.
The lute, a plucked string instrument, played a central role in European music from the late Middle Ages through the Baroque period. Its pear-shaped body and fretted neck made it a versatile instrument for both solo and ensemble performances. Unlike the modern guitar, the lute typically has paired strings, which produce a richer, more resonant tone. During the Renaissance, the lute was highly valued by both professional musicians and amateur players. Its popularity gradually declined in the 18th century, as keyboard instruments became more fashionable. Nevertheless, the lute remains an important subject of study for those interested in early music performance practices, and it is frequently used in historically informed concerts today.
The lack of interest among adolescents in school science courses is a complex issue, but two factors are particularly critical. Contemporary students live in a culture that increasingly emphasizes self-reflection and autonomy, and the range of subjects they are confronted with is far broader than in the past. Adolescence is a key period for the formation of identity, and ample evidence shows that the way subject choices contribute to one's sense of self, particularly in how they reflect personal values, is crucial for young people. Specifically, science curricula need to more clearly demonstrate the career pathways that science can offer both within scientific fields and in science-related professions, and articulate why these careers are valuable, meaningful, and rewarding.
John F. Kennedy had a high academic degree and was handsome, with a Hollywood-style appearance. He was the most popular politician partly because of his heroism in the war. He was awarded a medal in the war to prove his personal courage, and these qualities along with his charisma made him admired by the public. Because of these three characteristics, he became iconic in people's eyes. He was also blessed with handsome looks, mending political style, and a beautiful wife. All of this helped him prepare in advance for his re-election campaign.
Studies show that children who learn music often achieve higher average IQ scores. However, while Mozart is often associated with claims of higher intelligence, there is a lack of scientific evidence from proper tests to fully support this. The key process in such research involved 6-year-old children who learned music lessons and displayed an IQ gain of 3, 2 points, and some even exhibited an increase of 7, 1 points. Scientists also note that people who prefer heavy food often think it is more satisfying than lighter food, and people sometimes have the illusion that light drinks such as wine are healthier. This psychological feature of perception influences lifestyle choices just as much as measured IQ does.
IBM arranged a video game match between a supercomputer and human gamers. The fact that the computer has competed agonist humans made people worry whether scientific technologies could threaten us. However, the computer can only perform programs that are set by us. Even machine learning has not yet developed enough to think independently like humans.
The teaching of languages could be revolutionized following groundbreaking research by Victoria University, New Zealand, PhD graduate Paul Sulzberger. Dr. Sulzberger has found that the best way to learn a language is through frequent exposure to its sound patterns even if you have an A clue what it all means. However crazy it might sound, just listening to the language, even though you don't understand it, is critical. A lot of language teachers may not accept that, he says. Our ability to learn new words is directly related to how often we have been exposed to the particular combinations of the sounds which make up the words. If you want to learn Spanish, for example, frequently listening to a Spanish language radio station on the internet will dramatically boost your ability to pick up the language and learn new words. Dr. Sulzberger's research challenges existing language learning theory. His main hypothesis is that simply listening to a new language sets up the structures in the brain required to learn the words. The main purpose of fieldwork is to offer students a chance to apply what they have learned in the classroom to real-life situations. By doing so, they gain experience that cannot be obtained from books alone.
Whether you have blue eyes or brown, lactose tolerance or intolerance, curly hair or straight, the roots of these traits lie in your DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, is the hereditary material in humans and almost all other organisms, containing the biological instructions that make each species unique. DNA, first identified in the late 19th century and whose structure as a double helix was discovered in 1953 by Watson and Crick, is present in the nucleus of every cell in an organism. It's estimated that if unwound and linked together, the strands of DNA in one cell would stretch almost 6 feet in length. For many years, the complexity of DNA made understanding the full extent of its influence a distant dream. However, with the advent of advanced genomic technologies, scientists have made groundbreaking strides in understanding and mapping the human genome. My name is Tonia. My roommate and I are looking for a nice apartment near my college's campus. We are very quiet and study a lot. I study history and my roommate studies French. We are very interested in renting your apartment. We can pay the rent on time because we do a part-time work too. Some of our friends live in the same building and have recommended your place to us. They mentioned that you are a kind and responsible landlord and we hope to have the same positive experience. I would like to make an appointment to view the apartment in person. Our application form is ready, and we are prepared to proceed with the process quickly. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Best regards, Tonia. He spent a painful night struggling with his health. It was difficult for him to continue with his duties as usual. Despite his determination and eagerness to teach, he was not permitted to attend class due to his health condition. He was happy to attend and fulfill his responsibilities, but his illness prevented him from doing so. A drop in the incidence of lightning strikes could impact on the frequency of wildfires, especially in tropical regions. It could also lower the incidence of lightning strikes to infrastructure and affect how greenhouse gases in the atmosphere contribute to climate change. Scientists from the universities of Edinburgh and Leeds and Lancaster University used a newly devised method to calculate the likely incidence of lightning flashes from storm clouds. Unlike traditional calculations of lightning flashes at the global scale, which are based on the height of clouds, their approach takes into account the movement of tiny ice particles that form and move within clouds. Electrical charges build up in these ice particles and in cold water droplets and soft hail formed inside clouds. These are discharged during storms, giving rise to lightning flashes and thunder.
Each of us is born into and raised in a particular time world and environment with its own rhythm to which we entrain ourselves. Certain cultures have related to time as a cyclical phenomenon in which there is no pressure or future anxiety. The whole of existence goes around. The cycle of the seasons, of planting and harvesting, the daily return of the sun, of birth and death. In circular time, there is no pressing need to achieve and create newness, or to insatiably produce more than is needed to simply survive. Additionally, there is no fear of death. Such societies have successfully integrated the past and future into a peaceful sense of the present. They also honored the wisdom of elders who held the knowledge of the past upon which the future was clearly linked.
In an often cited study about counterfactuals, Medvec, Mady, and Jilovich, 1995, found that bronze medalists appeared happier than silver medalists in television coverage of the 1992 Summer Olympics. Medvec et al. Argued that bronze medalists compared themselves to fourth-place finishers, whereas silver medalists compared themselves to gold medalists. These counterfactuals were the most salient because they were either qualitatively different gold vs silver, or categorically different metal vs no metal from what actually occurred. Drawing on archival data and experimental studies, we show that Olympic athletes, among others, are more likely to make counterfactual comparisons based on their prior expectations, consistent with decision effect theory. Silver medalists are more likely to be disappointed because their personal expectations are higher than those of bronze medalists. The classic era of Mayan civilization came to an end around 900 AD. Why this happened is unclear. The cities were probably overfarming the land, so that a period of drought led to famine. Recent geological research supports this, as there appears to have been a 200-year drought around this time.
To better understand selfies and how people form their identities online, the researchers combed through 5 million selfie posts on Instagram to determine what kinds of identity statements people make by taking and sharing the photos. Nearly 52% of all selfies fell into the appearance category, pictures of people showing off their makeup, clothes, lips, etc. Overall, an overwhelming 57% of selfies on Instagram were posted by the 18-35-year-old crowd, something the researchers say isn't too surprising, considering the demographics of the social media platform. The under 18 age group posted about 30% of selfies.
Why does the smell of cut grass remind you of summer? How can you measure your nerve endings with a paper fastener? And how can you create the sound of church bells with just a serving spoon and a piece of string? These fascinating questions and more will be revealed by University of Manchester scientists when they take to the road on their brain bus. The bus is taking hands-on activities to test the senses to the suburbs, to show young and old alike how the brain works and how science can answer some of life's most captivating questions. Organizer Dr. Stuart Allen, lecturer at the Faculty of Life Sciences, explains, 3-year-olds and upwards can understand the senses, and it's an area that is intriguing to all ages. It takes effort to get out of bed on a Saturday morning and go to the museum. We are bringing science to your doorstep and going further afield this year in the hope of finding new and different audiences. We want people to see that science is interesting as well as important in our lives, and to encourage people who may not consider it possible to go to university. Until now, few sightings of the alien lionfish Terwa miles have been reported in the Mediterranean, and it was questionable whether the species could invade this region like it has in the Western Atlantic. Dimitris Kledu, co-author of the paper, said in a statement, "But we found that lionfish have recently increased in abundance and within a year have colonized almost the entire southeastern coast of Cyprus, assisted by sea surface warming." Lionfish were originally found in the waters of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. They likely ended up in the Caribbean and Western Atlantic after being released from home aquariums. The invasion of the Mediterranean has different routes. The expansion of the Suez Canal has given lionfish even more access to the Mediterranean Sea, and warming water temperatures have provided the perfect environment for the invasive species.
With the increase in women's participation in the labor force, many mothers have less time available to undertake domestic activities. At the same time, there has been increasing recognition that the father's role and relationship with a child is important. A father can have many roles in the family, ranging from income provider to teacher, carer, playmate, and role model. Therefore, balancing paid work and family responsibilities can be an important issue for both fathers and mothers in families.
Recently, research into embryonic development has given us an even better insight into how major structural changes might occur in a given population of organisms. We now understand that there are two major types of genes: developmental and housekeeping genes. Developmental genes are those that are expressed during embryonic development, and their proteins control the symmetry, skeletal development, organ placement, and overall form of the developing animal. In contrast, housekeeping genes are expressed during the animal's daily life to generate proteins which keep the cells, tissues, and organs in the body functioning properly. As you might suspect, mutations in developmental genes can have radical consequences for body form and function, whereas mutations in housekeeping genes tend to affect the health and reproductive success of the post-embryonic animal.
Managing performance is about getting people into action so that they achieve planned and agreed results. It focuses on what has to be done, how it should be done, and what is to be achieved. But it is equally concerned with developing people, helping them to learn, and providing them with the support they need to do well now and in the future. The framework for performance management is provided by the Performance Agreement, which is the outcome of performance planning. The agreement provides the basis for managing performance throughout the year and for guiding improvement and development activities. It is used as a reference point when reviewing performance and the achievement of improvement and development plans.
Decision-making is central to the management of an enterprise. The manager of a profit-making business has to decide on the manner of implementation of the objectives of the business, at least one of which may well relate to allocating resources so as to maximize profit. A nonprofit-making enterprise, such as a department of central or local government, will be making decisions on resource allocation so as to be economical, efficient, and effective in its use of finance. All organizations, whether in the private sector or the public sector, take decisions which have financial implications. Decisions will be about resources, which may be people, products, services, or long-term and short-term investment. Decisions will also be about activities, including whether and how to undertake them. Most decisions will at some stage involve consideration of financial matters, particularly cost. Children who skip school are increasingly on family holidays, government figures revealed today. Fewer children played truant this spring term compared with the spring term last year. Children missed 3M unauthorized days of school last term, compared with 7M days of school in the same period last year. But a hardcore group of truants, 6% of the school population, who account for more than 3/4 of all those on unauthorized absence, are more likely to be on a family holiday than they were in the same period last year. 2% of all absence was for family holidays not agreed by their school last term, compared with 9% for the same term last year. More than 60% of all absences were for illness, the same figure as last year.
From the time of the very earliest civilizations, man has wondered about the world he lives in, about how it was created, and about how it will end. In these distant times, the sun was seen to make its daily journey across the sky. At night, the moon appeared. Every new night, the moon waxed or waned a little, and on a few nights it did not appear at all. At night, the great dome of the heavens was dotted with tiny specks of light. They became known as the stars. It was thought that every star in the heavens had its own purpose, and that the secrets of the universe could be discovered by making a study of them. It was well known that there were wandering stars. They appeared in different nightly positions against their neighbors, and they became known as planets. It took centuries, in fact it took millennia, for man to determine the true nature of these wandering stars and to evolve a model of the world to accommodate them and to predict their positions in the sky.
In the fast-changing world of modern healthcare, the job of a doctor is more like the job of chief executive. The people who run hospitals and physicians' practices don't just need to know medicine, they must also be able to balance budgets, motivate a large and diverse staff, and make difficult marketing and legal decisions. More than simply putting flowers in a container, ikebana is a disciplined art form in which nature and humanity are brought together. Contrary to the idea of a particolored or multicolored arrangement of blossoms, ikebana often emphasizes other areas of the plant, such as its stems and leaves, and puts emphasis on shape, line, and form. Though ikebana is an expression of creativity, certain rules govern its form. The artist's intention is shown through a piece's color combinations, natural shapes, graceful lines, and the implied meaning of the arrangement.
Even after thousands of years exploring Earth, we're still uncovering new things like an ancient superhighway in the Guatemalan rainforest. Hidden beneath a thick layer of vegetation, the network of roads stretches over 150 miles and was most likely built by the Mayan Empire some 2,000 years ago. The newly mapped roads are connected to the ruins of El Mirador, sometimes called the Can Kingdom, in northern Guatemala. Archaeologists believe El Mirador was founded around the 6th century BCE and was at its most powerful around the early 1st century CE. At that time, it had a population of as many as a quarter of a million, a quarter the size of Rome itself at the time. It also has some of the largest pyramids in the world. It was the heart of the Mayan civilization and naturally needed some major roadways. The roads of El Mirador have been known about since 1967, but scientists had no idea how extensive they were until now. The thick jungle obscured the remnants of the road, making it difficult to see from the air.
What killed off the dinosaurs? The end of the Cretaceous period saw one of the most dramatic mass extinctions the Earth has ever seen. The fossil record shows that throughout their 160 million year existence, dinosaurs took on a huge variety of forms as the environment changed and new species evolved that were suited to these new conditions. Others that failed to adapt went extinct. But then 66 million years ago, over a relatively short time, dinosaurs disappeared, completely except for birds. Many other animals also died out, including pterosaurs, large marine reptiles, and other sea creatures such as ammonites. Although the number of dinosaur species was already declining, this suggests a sudden catastrophic event sealed their fate, causing unfavorable changes to the environment more quickly than dinosaurs and other creatures could adapt. The exact nature of this catastrophic event is still open to scientific debate. The catastrophe could have been an asteroid impact, volcanic eruptions, or the effect of both, together with more gradual changes in the Earth's climate over millions of years. Whatever the causes, the huge extinction that ended the age of the dinosaur left gaps in the ecosystem that were subsequently filled by mammals and birds, allowing them to evolve rapidly. The wristwatch works by tracking information such as a person's pulse or movement. When it detects a change in a person's health, the watch sends information to a touchscreen hub located in the home. The hub then alerts predetermined contacts and calls for help immediately.
Modern technology has enhanced the study of language by making its sounds observable in greater detail and with greater accuracy than ever before, but the thoughts associated with those sounds remain problematic. Currently developing, techniques of brain imaging are allowing us to observe for the first time which parts of the brain are active in different circumstances. They do not, however, show experiences themselves, which may always remain hidden from public observation. There is a sense in which each of us knows what we are thinking, although we may not always have a good way of verbalizing it. But the only way we can know what someone else is thinking is through what that person says, or through some other overt action, a facial expression or gesture, perhaps from which that person's thoughts may be inferred, or from imagining what we ourselves would be thinking in similar circumstances. Mercury is not found in many common products that we buy because it can be very dangerous. The most common products that contain mercury are batteries, powerful outdoor lights, disinfectants, and thermometers, which are used to measure our body's temperature. It can also be found in barometers, which are used to measure air pressure and show changes in weather, and thermostats, which regulate the temperature of buildings. Mercury can also be found in printer and photocopy toners.
Governments also frequently subsidize local industries to help them compete in the global market. Subsidies come in the form of tax credits or direct payments. The most commonly used are farm subsidies. That allows producers to lower the price of local goods and services. This makes the products cheaper, even when shipped overseas. Subsidies work even better than tariffs. This method works best for countries that rely mainly on exports. On the contrary, sometimes subsidies can have the opposite effect. The Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 allowed the government to pay farmers not to grow crops or livestock, which let their fields rest and regain nutrients. It helped the agriculture industry, but raised food costs during the Depression.
Victorians were avid readers. Just as we bury our faces in our mobile devices on the morning commute, so too did Victorians with the latest penny fiction. Perhaps the best-known serialized novels were the penny dreadfuls. Costing just one old penny, they focused on the exploits of detectives, criminals, or supernatural entities. The price of new books, often only available as a set of 3, was out of reach for most working-class people, so they borrowed from circulating libraries, such as Mudie's, founded 1842, which dispatched books all over Britain for a modest, could afford first editions, reading from their own subscription fee. For the wealthier classes whose collection would be an everyday occurrence.
Merging in the mid-1950s in Britain and late 1950s in America, pop art reached its peak in the 1960s. It began as a revolt against the dominant approaches to art and culture and traditional views on what art should be. Young artists felt that what they were taught at art school and what they saw in museums did not have anything to do with their lives or the things they saw around them every day. Instead, they turned to sources such as Hollywood movies, advertising, product packaging, pop music, and comic books for their imagery.
In the UK, it is recommended that drivers should turn off their car engines when they expect to be stationary for more than 1 minute. To encourage drivers to turn off their engines while waiting at rail crossings, the Kent City Council placed a permanent sign at the crossing asking drivers to please switch off your engine when barriers are down to help improve air quality. On average, drivers had to wait between 2 and 3 minutes to cross after the barrier had gone down. However, the sign didn't seem to be convincing the majority of drivers to switch off their engines. Although some research suggests that signs alone can change behavior, the message on this sign was designed simply to be an informational request and was not guided by any particular behavioral theory, the researchers explain. So the research team, led by Rose Melody of the University of East Anglia, designed an intervention study.
The research, commissioned by HEDGF, asked 1,000 students from UK universities for their views on the quality of their university campus and sheds new light on how students make decisions as they go through the application process. When asked what the most important factors were when deciding where to study, 76% of students ranks campus facilities as either quite or very important, with only 8% saying it was not very or not at all important in their choice. This was the fourth most important factor after course, location, and reputation. Estate quality increases in importance once a student has chosen a university, with 86% of students saying that it is quite or very important in their first year of studies. However, the important students attached to estates decreases to 79% for third-year students. The research also highlighted how factors such as demographics, region, and type of university attended have an impact on how students view the university buildings. Students in Russell Group universities are much more likely to describe their buildings as inspiring, closely followed by students in newer universities such as Lincoln, Gloucestershire, and Ravensbourne College. This pattern was repeated when students were asked to rate the overall quality and design of a state, with Russell Group students and students from newer universities more likely to rate the estates as excellent. Existing data shows capital expenditure on estates has been the highest amongst the Russell Group universities during 2001-2011. When asked where they would invest money in their universities, the top 3 areas in order of preference were smaller class sizes, bursaries for poorer students, and new buildings and facilities.
Early humans were hunter-gatherers, roaming from place to place, but their movements were controlled by the need for water. When humans started to grow food and established permanent settlements, water was needed for crops and animals as well as for people, so settlements have always grown up near reliable sources of water. Most major towns lie on the banks of rivers, or, where there are no streams or rivers, settlements exist where underground water can be reached by digging wells. The management of water resources has a long history. The oldest known dam in the world was constructed in Egypt about 5,000 years ago and was used for storing drinking and irrigation water. Farmers in Arabia at this time used the craters of extinct volcanoes as storage tanks for irrigation water and dug deep wells for their drinking water. Excavated ruins in India of similar antiquity retain the remains of water supply and drainage systems, which included baths and swimming pools. Everyone who goes to college knows how important it is to get along with a roommate. Well, at least they know how important it is after they have tried it. When I first went to college, I hadn't given it much thought until I was introduced to Martin, that is. It's not that Martin was some terrible monster or anything, just that we were, well, incompatible. The actual sharing of the space didn't present much of a problem. He had his side and I had mine. That worked very well. No, the problem was more to do with sharing time. Martin, you see, was a night owl and I am not. So when at midnight I was tucked up in bed with a book, Martin was just getting started. And when at 3 in the morning his friends were still coming round to pay a social visit, my smile was wearing thin. Despite all this, Martin and I remained firm friends throughout college. Surprised. Okay, perhaps our friendship was helped along a little by the fact that we were able to swap roommates after our first week.
Classical music, often regarded as a vestige of the past, continues to have a profound impact on modern life, influencing various aspects including stress relief, cognitive development, and cultural appreciation. Studies have demonstrated that listening to classical music can significantly reduce stress levels, leading to a calmer, more focused state of mind. This genre of music is not only a tool for relaxation, but also a catalyst for enhancing cognitive functions. For instance, the Mozart effect suggests that exposure to classical compositions can temporarily boost spatial reasoning skills. Moreover, classical music serves as a bridge to cultural heritage, offering insights into the historical, social, and philosophical contexts of different eras. The inclusion of classical music in contemporary media, such as films and video games, underscores its enduring appeal and its ability to convey emotional depth and narrative complexity. Despite the dominance of pop and electronic music in the mainstream, classical music continues to nurture a dedicated following, drawn to its timeless beauty and the technical prowess required to perform it. Its universal language speaks to the timeless human experience, reminding us of the enduring power of artistic expression.
Applied science will continue for a long time to come. Scientists will keep developing versatile new materials, faster and more sophisticated computers, genetic, engineering techniques that make us healthier, stronger, longer-lived, perhaps even fusion reactors that provide cheap energy with few environmental side effects. The question is, will these advances in applied science bring about any surprises, any revolutionary shifts in our basic knowledge? Learning that we humans were created, not de novo by God but gradually by the process of natural selection was a big surprise. Most other aspects of human evolution, those concerning where, when and how precisely Homo sapiens evolved, are details. These details may be interesting, but they are not likely to be surprising unless they show that scientists' basic assumptions about evolution are wrong. We may learn, say, that our sudden surge in intelligence was catalyzed by the intervention of alien beings, as in the movie 200. That would be a very big surprise. In fact, any proof that life exists or even once existed beyond our little planet would constitute a huge surprise. Science and all human thought would be reborn.
Spanish is spoken by more than 300 million people in over 20 countries and is rapidly becoming one of the most popular choices for language learners around the world. A popular course for beginners, Suno's World Spanish is designed to meet the varied needs of adult learners, whether learning at home or in a class. From the very beginning, it encourages you to develop your listening and speaking skills with confidence and provides many opportunities to practice reading in Spanish. Using the extensive range of media available, from the coursebook to the audio CD or cassettes, to the popular accompanying television series and free online activities, Suno's World Spanish can help you reach the equivalent level of A First qualification, such as GCSE.
The logic of the scientific method was set out by John Stuart Mill in 1843 and was named the method of difference. A simple example of what he meant by this is to take 2 glasses of water which are identical in every respect, introduce a few drops of ink into one of these glasses. The water changes color. According to Mill's method of difference, it is safe to assume that the change in the color of the water is due to the introduction of a new factor, the independent variable, in this case, the ink.
Many people today think of culture in the way that it was thought of in Europe during the 18th and early 19th centuries. This concept of culture reflected inequalities within European societies and their colonies around the world. This understanding of culture equates culture with civilization and contrasts both with nature or non-civilization. According to this understanding of culture, some countries are more civilized than others, and some people are more cultured than others. Anything that doesn't fit into this category is labeled as chaos or anarchy. From this perspective, culture is closely tied to cultivation, which is the progressive refinement of human behavior. In practice, culture referred to elite goods and activities such as haute cuisine, high fashion or haute couture, museum-caliber art, and classical music. The word cultured referred to people who knew about and took part in these activities. For example, someone who used culture in this sense might argue that classical music is more refined than music by working-class people, such as jazz or the indigenous music traditions of Aboriginal peoples.
Over 800 Shakespeare scholars from almost 50 countries will gather at King's College London next week, as the university co-hosts the 10th World Shakespeare Congress to explore and honor the bard's life and work. Organized by the International Shakespeare Association, the World Congress is held every 5 years. In 2016 is the first time it will be co-hosted in 2 locations that were integral to both the personal and working life of William Shakespeare. Delegates will arrive in London on Thursday following the start of the Congress on Sunday in Stratford-upon-Avon. With a main theme of creating and recreating Shakespeare, the Congress will look at the continuing global relevance of Shakespeare's work through a varied program of plenaries, panels, seminars, and workshops. Genius in the popular conception is inextricably tied up with precocity. Doing something truly creative, we're inclined to think, requires the freshness and exuberance and energy of youth. Orson Welles made his masterpiece, Citizen Kane, at 25. Herman Melville wrote a book a year, through his late 20s, culminating at the age of 32 with Moby Dick. Mozart wrote his breakthrough piano Concerto No. 9 in E-flat major at the age of 21. In some creative forms like lyric poetry, the importance of precocity has hardened into an iron law. How old was T.S. Eliot when he wrote the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, I grow old, 23. Poets peak young, the creativity researcher James Kaufman maintains. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the author of Flow, agrees. The most creative lyric verse is believed to be that written by the young. According to the Harvard psychologist Howard Gardner, a leading authority on creativity, lyric poetry is a domain where talent is discovered early, burns brightly, and then peters out at an early age.
Clean water was very important to the Romans. Cities, towns, and forts were built near springs. However, as Roman cities and towns grew, they needed to bring in water from further afield. As the population grew, so did the need for clean water. Trying to shift large volumes of water underground in pipes was not possible, as lead pipes would be too weak and bronze pipes would be too expensive. The Romans could not make cast iron pipes as the techniques for doing this were not known to them. If water could not be brought via pipes, the Romans decided to bring it over land in what were conduits. When the water got to the city, it was fed off into smaller bronze or ceramic pipes. To get the water to flow at an even and slow pace, conduits were built on a slight slope. Valleys were crossed by using aqueducts. One of the most famous of these is the Pont du Gard aqueduct at Nimes in southern France. Where possible, the Romans did take water through tunnels, but the hills needed to be relatively small for this to be successful.
Over the past 2 decades, around a third of the world's mangrove swamps have been converted for human use, with many turned into valuable shrimp farms. In 2007, an economic study of such shrimp farms in Thailand showed that the commercial profits per hectare were $9,632. If that were the only factor, conversion would seem an excellent idea. However, proper accounting shows that for each hectare, government subsidies formed $8,412 of this figure, and there were costs, too. $1,000 for pollution and $12,392 for losses to ecosystem services. These comprised damage to the supply of foods and medicines that people had taken from the forest, the loss of habitats for fish, and less buffering against storms. And because a given shrimp farm only stays productive for 3 or 4 years, there was the additional cost of restoring them afterwards. If you do so with mangroves themselves, add another $9,318 per hectare. The overall lesson is that what looks beneficial only does so because the profits are retained by the private sector, while the problems are spread out across society at large, appearing on no specific balance sheet.
Team Lab's digital mural at the entrance to Tokyo's Skytree, one of the world's monster skyscrapers, is 40 meters long and immensely detailed. However massive this form of digital art becomes, and it's a form, subject to rampant inflation, Inoko's theories about seeing are based on more modest and often pre-digital sources. An early devotee of comic books and cartoons, no surprises there, then computer games, he recognized when he started to look at traditional Japanese art that all those forms had something in common, something about the way they captured space. In his discipline of physics, Inoko had been taught that photographic lenses, along with the conventions of Western art, were the logical way of transforming 3 dimensions into 2, conveying the real world onto a flat surface. But Japanese traditions employed a different spatial logic, as he said in an interview last year with Jay Colabo, that is uniquely Japanese.
The speed of sound, otherwise known as Mach 1, varies with temperature. At sea level on a standard day, the temperature is 59 degrees F, and Mach 1 is approximately 761 mph. As the altitude increases, the temperature and speed of sound both decrease until about 36,000 feet, after which the temperature remains steady until about 60,000 feet. Within that 36,000, 60,000 foot range, Mach 1 is about 661 mph. Because of the variation, it is possible for an airplane flying supersonic at high altitude to be slower than a subsonic flight at sea level. The transonic band, the sound barrier, extends from around Mach 0.8, when the first supersonic shock waves form on the wing, to Mach 1, 2, when the entire wing has gone supersonic.
Dance has played an important role in many musicals. In some cases, dance numbers are included as an excuse to add to the color and spectacle of the show, but dance is more effective when it forms an integral part of the plot. An early example is Richard Rodgers' On Your Toes, 1936, in which the story about classical ballet meeting the world of jazz enabled dance to be introduced in a way that enhances rather than interrupts the drama.
Bhutan is the last standing Buddhist kingdom in the world, and until recently, has preserved much of their culture since the 17th century by avoiding globalization and staying isolated from the world. Internet, television, and Western dress were banned from the country up until 10 years ago. But over the past 10 years, globalization has begun to change in Bhutan, but things remain perfectly balanced. Bhutan is the only country in the world that has a GNH. You may think GNH is just another statistically based term with no real-life application, but it refers to gross national happiness. The process of measuring GNH began when Bhutan opened to globalization. It measures people's quality of life and makes sure that material and spiritual development happen together. Bhutan has done an amazing job of finding this balance. Bhutan has continually been ranked as the happiest country in all of Asia, and the 8th happiest country in the world according to Business Week. In 2007, Bhutan had the second fastest-growing GDP in the world, at the same time as maintaining their environment and cultural identity.
Catherine Muse does not meet bohemian, hippie parents in her line of work. Typically one or both of the parents she sees work in the City of London. Professionals seek professionals, she says. Originally a nanny, Muse is now a parenting consultant, advising couples privately on changing their child's behavior, as well as doing corporate seminars for working parents. Her clients find they are unprepared for the chaos and unpredictability that having a child can entail. Parents are getting older, they have been in control their whole lives and been successful. Suddenly a baby turns up and life turns on its head. Nicknamed the 3-day nanny, because of her pledge to fix behavioral problems in children under the age of 12 within 3 days, she is filming a new Channel 4 television series demonstrating her techniques. Role of the parenting consultant, distinct from that of a nanny, has developed, she says, as people are used to buying in expertise such as personal trainers or, in her case, parenting advice.
The widespread use of artificial light in modern societies means that light pollution is an increasingly common feature of the environments humans inhabit. This type of pollution is exceptionally high in coastal regions of tropic and temperate zones, as these are areas of high rates of human population growth and settlement. Light pollution is a threat for many species that inhabit these locations, particularly those whose ecology or behavior depends, in some way, on natural cycles of light and dark. Artificial light is known to have detrimental effects on the ecology of sea turtles, particularly at the hatchling stage when they emerge from nests on natal beaches and head towards the sea. Under natural conditions, turtles hatch predominantly at night, although some early morning and late afternoon emergence occurs, and show an innate and well-directed orientation to the water, relying mostly on light cues that attract them toward the brighter horizon above the sea surface. Artificial lighting on beaches is strongly attractive to hatchlings and can cause them to move away from the sea and interfere with their ability to orient in a constant direction. Ultimately, this disorientation due to light pollution can lead to death of hatchlings from exhaustion, dehydration, and predation. Bhutan used to be one of the most isolated nations in the world. Developments including direct international flights, the internet, mobile phone networks, and cable television have increasingly modernized the urban areas of the country. Bhutan has balanced modernization with its ancient culture and traditions under the guiding philosophy of gross national happiness, GNH. Rampant destruction of the environment has been avoided. The government takes great measures to preserve the nation's traditional culture, identity, and the environment. In 2006, Business Week magazine rated Bhutan the happiest country in Asia and the 8th happiest in the world. Citing a global survey conducted by the University of Leicester in 2006, called the World Map of Happiness.
There has been a great variety of critical approach to Shakespeare's work since his death. During the 17th and 18th century, Shakespeare was both admired and condemned. Since then, much of the adverse criticism has not been considered relevant, although certain issues have continued to interest critics throughout the years. For instance, charges against his moral propriety were made by Samuel Johnson in the 18th century and by George Bernard Shaw in the 20th. Early criticism was directed primarily at questions of form. Shakespeare was criticized for mixing comedy and tragedy and failing to observe the unities of time and place, prescribed by the rules of classical drama. Dryden and Johnson were among the critics claiming that he had corrupted the language with false wit, puns, and ambiguity. While some of his early plays might justly be charged with a frivolous use of such devices, 20th century criticism has tended to praise their use in later plays as adding depth and resonance of meaning.
Crime prevention has a long history in Australia and in other parts of the world. In all societies, people have tried to protect themselves and those close to them from assaults and other abuses. Every time someone locks the door to their house or their car, they practice a form of prevention. Most parents want their children to learn to be law-abiding and not spend extended periods of their lives in prison. In this country, at least, most succeed. Only a small minority of young people become recidivist offenders. In a functioning society, crime prevention is part of everyday life. While prevention can be all-pervasive at the grassroots, it is oddly neglected in mass media and political discourses. When politicians, talkback radio hosts, and newspaper editorialists pontificate about crime and possible remedies, it is comparatively rare for them to mention prevention. Overwhelmingly, emphasis is on policing, sentencing, and other law and order responses. Cultural studies is a new way of engaging in the study of culture. In the past, many academic subjects including anthropology, history, literary studies, human geography, and sociology have brought their own disciplinary concerns to the study of culture. However, in recent decades there has been a renewed interest in the study of culture that has crossed disciplinary boundaries. Resulting activities and cultural studies have emerged as an intriguing and exciting area of intellectual inquiry that has already shed important new life on the character of human cultures and which promises to continue to do so. While there is a little doubt that cultural studies are coming to be widely recognized as an important and distinctive field of study, it does seem to encompass a potentially enormous area. This is because the term culture has a complex history and range of usages, which have provided a legitimate focus of inquiry for several academic disciplines.
It is an original work, not an excerpted passage. An abstract must be fully self-contained and make sense by itself without further reference to outside sources or to the actual paper. It highlights key content areas, your research purpose, the relevance or importance of your work, and the main outcomes. It is a well-developed single paragraph of approximately 250 words in length, which is indented and single-spaced. The function of the abstract is to outline briefly all parts of the paper. Although it is placed at the beginning of your paper, immediately following the title page, the abstract should be the last thing that you write, once you are sure of the conclusions you will reach. The 6 gases, helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and radon, have a myriad of modern uses. When they were first discovered, their strangely standoffish properties were a mystery. Uniquely stable, they seem to participate in no chemical reactions. But by understanding the stability of the noble gases, physicists discovered the key to chemical bonding itself. Dmitri Mendeleev added the noble gases to his periodic table in 1902, where he arranged the elements in rows and columns according to their atomic weight. Mendeleev was able to see repeating or periodic patterns in their properties. The noble gases appeared regularly in the periodic table, occurring in every eighth position at least amongst the lighter elements.
One of the Supreme Court's most important responsibilities is to decide cases that raise questions of constitutional interpretation. The court decides if a law or government action violates the Constitution. This is known as judicial review and enables the court to invalidate both federal and state laws when they conflict with the Constitution. Since the Supreme Court stands as the ultimate authority in constitutional interpretation, its decisions can be changed only by another Supreme Court decision or by a constitutional amendment.
That Sigmund Freud became a major intellectual presence in 20th century culture is not in doubt. Nor is there any doubt that at all times there was both fervent enthusiasm over and bitter hostility to his ideas and influence. But the exact means by which Freud became, despite this hostility, a master of intellectual life on a par, already in the 1920s, with Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, and Bertrand Russell, has not been sufficiently explored. Strikingly, Freud emerged as a 20th century icon without the endorsement and support of an institution or a profession, in contrast to Einstein, Curie, and Russell. Where are we to look for the details of this story of an emergent and new figure of immense cultural authority? One of the principal aims of this book is to show how this happened in one local, parochial yet privileged site, Cambridge, then is now a university town stranded in the English fens with a relatively small, fluctuating population.
When humans began farming some 12,000 years ago, they altered the future of our species forever. Our ancestors were ecological pioneers, discovering and cultivating the most valuable crops, scaling them up to feed entire communities, and transforming wild crops so fundamentally that they became dependent on humans for their survival. Farming, in the words of National Geographic's Genographic Project, sowed the seeds for the modern age.
Life expectancy at birth is one of the most widely used and internationally recognized indicators of population health. It focuses on the length of life, rather than its quality, and provides a useful summary of the general health of the population. While an indicator describing how long Australians live that simultaneously takes into account quality of life would be desirable summary measure of progress in the area, currently no such measure exists, and this is why life expectancy at birth is used as the main progress indicator here. During the decade 1999 to 2009, life expectancy at birth improved for both sexes. A girl born in 2009 could expect to reach 83, 9 years of age, while a boy could expect to live to 79, 3 years. Over the decade, boys' life expectancy increased slightly more than girls' 3, 1 compared with 2, 1 years. This saw the gap between the sexes' life expectancy decrease by 1 year to 4, 6 years. In the longer term, increases in life expectancy also occurred over most of the 20th century. Unfortunately, life expectancy isn't shared across the whole population though, being lower in Tasmania and the Northern Territory, and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Leadership is all about being granted permission by others to lead their thinking. It is a bestowed moral authority that gives the right to organize and direct the efforts of others. But moral authority does not come from simply managing people effectively or communicating better or being able to motivate. It comes from many sources, including being authentic and genuine, having integrity, and showing a real and deep understanding of the business in question. All these factors build confidence. Leaders lose moral authority for 3 reasons. They behave unethically, they become plagued by self-doubt and lose their conviction, or they are blinded by power, lose self-awareness and thus lose connection with those they lead as the context around them changes. Having said all this, it has to be assumed that if someone becomes a leader, at some point they understood the difference between right and wrong. It is up to them to abide by a moral code and up to us to ensure that the moment we suspect they do not, we fire them or vote them out. In The Origin of Species, Darwin provided abundant evidence that life on Earth has evolved over time, and he proposed natural selection as the primary mechanism for that change. He observed that individuals differ in their inherited traits and that selection acts on such differences, leading to evolutionary change. Although Darwin realized that variation in heritable traits is a prerequisite for evolution, he did not know precisely how organisms pass heritable traits to their offspring. Just a few years after Darwin published The Origin of Species, Gregory Mendel wrote a groundbreaking paper on inheritance in pea plants. In that paper, Mendel proposed a model of inheritance in which organisms transmit discrete heritable units, now called genes, to their offspring. Although Darwin did not know about genes, Mendel's paper set the stage for understanding the genetic differences on which evolution is based.
The Edo Tokyo Tate Mono N is an open-air architectural museum, but could be better thought of as a park. 30 buildings from the 19th and early 20th centuries from all around Tokyo were restored and relocated to the space, where they can be explored by future generations to come. The buildings are a collection of houses and businesses, shops and bathhouses, all of which would have been present on a typical middle-class street from Edara to Showa-era Tokyo. The west section is residential, with traditional thatched roof bungalows of the 19th century. Meiji-era houses are also on view, constructed in a more Western style after Japan opened its borders in 1868. The Musashino Sabo Cafe occupies the ground floor of one such house, where visitors can enjoy a cup of tea. Grand residences like that of Korkio Takahashi, an early 20th century politician assassinated over his controversial policies, demonstrate how the upper class lived during that time period. The east section is primarily businesses from the 1920s and 30s, preserved with their wares on display. Visitors are free to wander through a kitchenware shop, a florist's, an umbrella store, a bar, a soy sauce shop, a tailor's, a cosmetics shop, and an inn complete with an operational noodle shop.
An American retail giant is set to its suppliers to measure and report their greenhouse gas emissions. There is a need to disclose business emission. The data of emission can be used to test which company causes climate change, conflate the government, campaigners and environmental invigilators.
The increasing darkness in the northern hemisphere this time of year indicates to the plant that fall is coming on, so it starts recouping materials from the leaves before they drop off. Evergreens protect their needle-like foliage from freezing with waxy coatings and natural antifreezes, but broadleaf plants like sugar maples, birches, and sumacs have no such protections. As a result, they shed their leaves, but before they do, the plants first try to salvage important nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus.
There comes a time in a desert ant's life when a piece of food is too large to ignore but too heavy to lift, and the only way to get it home is to adopt a new style of walking. The long-legged and speedy Cataglyphis fortis normally covers ground with a three-legged stride that moves two legs forwards on one side and one on the other. For the next step, the insect mirrors the move with its other three legs. But recordings of ants in the Tunisian desert reveal that when faced with oversized lumps of food 10 times their own weight, the forward tripod walking style is abandoned. Unable to lift the morsels in their mandibles, the ants drag the food backwards instead, moving all 6 legs independently. This is the first time we have seen this in any ants, said lead author Sarah Pfeffer at the University of Ulm in Germany. The ants' long legs already help keep their bodies away from the scorching desert floor, and enable them to speed around at up to 60 cm per second. The researchers, who published the findings on ant locomotion and navigation in the Journal of Experimental Biology, believe that robotics will be one of the first technologies to benefit from the discovery. The modern research ship takes its origins from the early exploration voyages, such as HMS Endeavour and HMS Challenger, both of which were converted vessels, fitted with a range of research facilities to sample and measure across a range of disciplines in extreme environments. Early research vessels were fairly basic and simplistic compared to the state-of-the-art ships we see being developed today. Gradually, the trend of converting other vessels into research ships was challenged by the challenging demands of investigating increasingly complex areas of oceanographic research, such as physical, biological, and chemical oceanography, marine geology and geophysics, ocean engineering, and atmospheric science in one expedition. In order to carry out multidisciplinary research in extreme environments, specially designed research vessels became a requirement. Research ships are the primary source of oceanographic observations and will remain so for the foreseeable future. As time goes on, science is likely to be conducted in increasingly remote and environmentally challenging areas, including the polar seas, so their ability to operate with minimal interruptions from the natural elements remains unchanged from the days of the Challenger expedition.
Interior design is a professionally conducted, practice-based process of planning and realization of interior spaces and the elements within. Interior design is concerned with the function and operation of the aesthetics and its sustainability. The work of an interior designer draws upon many other disciplines such as environmental psychology, architecture, product design, and aesthetics, in relation to a wide range of building spaces including hotels, corporate and public spaces, schools, hospitals, private residences, shopping malls, restaurants, theaters, and airport terminals. Research has suggested that major stressors in our lives are life changes, for example, moving house, marriage, or relationship breakdown. Work-related factors, including unemployment and boredom, are also common causes of stress. Differences in personality may also play a part. A stress reaction is a response to a perceived threat. Different people perceive things in different ways, so a situation that one person finds very stressful might not be to someone else.
A renewed interest in well-being, especially among baby boomers, as well as rising personal incomes, led to more spending on health and fitness in 2005. This prompted an expansion in the number of fitness and recreation centers across the country. Golf courses also enjoyed renewed success as the sport increased in popularity, possibly the result of retiring baby boomers heading to the links. In 2005, households spent an average of $3,918 on recreation, up slightly from $3,678 in 2004. Items included in the 2005 figure are an average of $166 on sports and athletic equipment, $665 to buy and operate recreational vehicles such as snowmobiles, bicycles, and trailers, and $299 for the use of sports and recreation facilities.
It would be reassuring to think that the electorate choose who to vote for based on the candidates, track records, and future policy promises. In truth, many of us are swayed simply by the way that politicians look. Consider a 2009 study that asked Swiss students to look at multiple pairs of unfamiliar French political candidates, and in each case to select the one who looked most competent. Most of the time, the candidate selected by students as looking the most competent was also the one who'd had real-life electoral success. The implication being that voters too had been swayed by the candidate's appearance. there's little evidence that appearance and competence actually correlate. Unsurprisingly, being attractive also helps win votes, especially in wartime and peacetime. Looking trustworthy is more of an advantage. Other research has shown that we're more likely to vote for male and female candidates with deeper voices. Affordable early years education and childcare potentially enables parents, particularly mothers, to be in paid employment. International studies have found that countries with greater enrollment rates in publicly funded or provided childcare also have higher maternal employment rates, although untangling causal relationships is complex. From the point of view of the household, additional income, especially for the less well-off, is itself associated with better outcomes for children, as child poverty has been shown to be a key independent determinant of children's outcomes. From the point of view of the public purse, as mothers enter employment, they are likely to claim fewer benefits and to generate extra revenues through income tax.
Some students say that they need complete quiet to read and study. Others study best in a crowded, noisy room because the noise actually helps them concentrate. Some students like quiet music playing, others do not. The point is, you should know the level of noise that is optimal for your own studying. However, one general rule for all students is that the television seems to be more of a distraction than music or other background noise, so leave the TV off when you are reading or studying. Also, don't let yourself become distracted by computer games, email, or internet surfing.
Clones of an eastern cottonwood, Populus deltoides, in the Bronx and other city spots grew to double the biomass of clones. Planted outside small towns upstate or on Long Island, says Jillian Gregg, now of the Environmental Protection Agency's Western Ecology Division in Corvallis, or. The growth gap comes from ozone damage, she and her New York colleagues report. Ozone chemists have known that concentrations may spike skyscraper high in city air, but during a full 24 hours, rural trees actually get a higher cumulative ozone exposure from urban pollution that blows in and lingers. A series of new experiments now shows that this hang-around ozone is the overwhelming factor in tree growth, the researchers say in the July 10 Nature. This study has profound importance in showing us most vividly that rural areas pay the price for urban pollution, says Stephen P. Long of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. This work should be a wake-up call, he adds.
Assessments of language learning in 18-month-olds suggest that children are better at grasping the names of objects with repeated syllables over words with non-identical syllables. Researchers say the study may help explain why some words or phrases such as train and good night have given rise to versions with repeated syllables, such as choo-choo and night-night. The researchers say such words are easier for infants to learn and may provide them with a starter point for vocabulary learning. A team from the University of Edinburgh assessed the infant's language learning behavior in a series of visual and attention tests, using pictures on a computer screen of two unfamiliar objects. The two objects were named with made-up words which were communicated to the infants by a recorded voice, one with two identical syllables, for example Nini, and the other without repeated syllables such as Bale. The infants were then tested for their recognition of each word. Recordings of their eye movements showed they looked more reliably at the object labeled with repeated syllables than the other object. Researchers validated their results with a control test in which the infants responded to pictures of familiar objects such as a dog or an apple. We now know through the work of neuroscientists that the human brain is wired to mimic other people, and this mimicry involves actual involuntary physiological experience in the observer. Human beings tend to imitate actions that they see. Physiologically, our brains include mirror neurons which react to actions that are seen as if we are doing the action ourselves. It is largely an unconscious and automatic experience. When we hear people speak, observe their vocal nuances, watch their posture, gestures, and facial expressions, etc. Neural networks in our brains are stimulated by the shared representations, generating feelings within us that reflect the experience of those we are observing.
Mischel is the creator of the marshmallow test, one of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology, which is often cited as evidence of the importance of self-control. In the original test, which was administered at the Bing Nursery School at Stanford in the 1960s, Mischel's team would present a child with a treat. Marshmallows were just one option, and tell her that she could either eat the one treat immediately or wait alone in the room for several minutes until the researcher returned, at which point she could have two treats. The promised treats were always visible, and the child knew that all she had to do to stop the agonizing wait was ring a bell to call the experimenter back, although in that case, she wouldn't get the second treat. The longer a child delayed gratification, Mischel found that the longer she was able to wait, the better she would fare later in life at numerous measures of what we now call executive function. She would perform better academically, earn more money, and be healthier and happier. She would also be more likely to avoid a number of negative outcomes, including jail time, obesity, and drug use.
People in parts of Western Africa and Southwestern Asia were the first to realize that the dark silvery rocks poking out of the earth could be worked into tools and weapons, sometime around 1500 BC. Evidence shows the metal was probably discovered there by accident when some ore was dropped into a fire and cooled into wrought iron, historians think. The Eureka moment didn't reach Europe for another 500 years, traveling slowly north and west through Greece, Italy, Central Europe, and finally to the British Isles, with the spread of the famous Celtic tribes. The Celts diffused iron technology over much of the continent through warfare, where their victory was assured due to the strength of iron weapons. Perhaps not the most peaceful of cultural exchanges, but where the technology did travel, it caught on fast. Iron made life a lot easier in those days, when just living to the age of 45 was a feat. By that time, much of Europe had settled into small village life, toiling the soil with bronze and stone tools. Iron farming tools, such as sickles and plow tips, made the process more efficient and allowed farmers to exploit tougher soils, try new crops, and have more time for other activities.
Context is a quarterly magazine of the American Sociological Association about society and social behavior. Directed to anyone interested in the latest sociological ideas and research, Context seeks to apply new knowledge, stimulate fresh thinking, and disseminate important information. Produced by the discipline. The publication's articles synthesize key findings, weave together diverse strands of work, draw out implications for policy, and debate issues of controversy. The hallmarks of Contexts are accessibility, broad appeal, and timeliness. By design, it is not a technical journal, but a magazine for diverse readers who wish to be current about social science knowledge, emerging trends, and their relevance. The universality of story feature films are narratives. They tell stories. Even films based on true events will fictionalize them in order to produce drama, to telescope time, to avoid being filled up with too many minor characters, or simply to be more entertaining. Even in the current welter of special effect movies, feature films are usually summarized by their plots in their first treatment or outline of the script idea, in the advance publicity, in the TV guide, in reviews, and in conversations. Films may differ from other kinds of narrative literary fiction or television drama, for instance in the medium used and the representational conventions. They do, however, share with literary fiction and television drama the basic structure and functions of narrative. Much work has been done by researchers in the field known as neurotology on exactly what constitutes the structures and functions of the narrative. Their conclusions are of great use to students of the feature film.
Many tests have shown that, in a very broad way, people in most parts of the world have similar color preferences. Blue is the most preferred and popular hue, followed in order by red, green, purple, yellow, and orange. Overlaying this basic order of color preference, however, are the responses of individuals, which of course vary widely and may also be very powerful. Children are likely to have strong preferences for some colors and aversions to others, but sometimes will not admit to them, since outside factors may be influential in determining both color preferences and the way that they are expressed or suppressed. Current fashions in clothes and accessories, gender stereotyping, and peer group pressure may all play a significant part. Boys, in particular, may be reluctant to admit to any strong preferences for colors other than those of favorite football teams, because color awareness may be regarded by the peer group as feminine. But look beyond fossil fuels for the most intriguing trends. One is that the energy intensity of the world economy, the amount of energy it takes to produce $1 worth of income, keeps falling at a rate of about 2%. What this means is that even without any change in the relative shares of fossil-based and fossil-free sources in the world's energy mix, we could have 2% annual economic growth without increasing carbon emissions from energy use. Of course, that is not enough to address climate change, and we need more economic growth than that. It is, nonetheless, a stunning number, which refutes the claim by some environmentalists that permanent economic growth is fundamentally incompatible with finite physical resources.
Paraphrasing is often defined as putting a passage from an author into your own words. However, what are your own words? How different must your paraphrase be from the original? The answer is it should be considerably different. The whole point of paraphrasing is to show you have read and understood another person's ideas and can summarize them in your own writing style rather than borrowing their phrases. If you just change a few words or add some bits of your own to an otherwise reproduced passage, you will probably be penalized for plagiarism. You should aim to condense and simplify a writer's ideas and describe them using different sentence structures and expressions. It is also important to credit the original writer by referencing. The stock of Australia's dwellings is evolving, with current homes having more bedrooms on average than homes 10 years ago. At the same time, households are getting smaller on average, with decreasing proportions of couple families with children and increasing couple-only and lone-person households. This article examines the changes in household size and number of bedrooms from 1994-95 to 2003-04. Mechanical engineering was at the heart of Taylor's theorizing, providing the context for its development, the worldview by which it was sustained, and finally, the justification for its widespread application. Scientific management aimed to analyze and control the activities of people in the same way that engineers analyzed and controlled machines. Central to Taylor's system was the desire to rationalize and standardize production techniques in the interests of economy, efficiency, and mutual prosperity. His primary point of interest was the individual worker, pursuing individual goals and motivated by incentive payments. Undoubtedly, Taylor's view of human motivation was somewhat simplistic, and his apprehension of the significance of groups was limited and generally negative.
The environmental impact of the global textile industry is hard to overstate. 1/3 of the water used worldwide is spent fashioning fabrics. For every ton of cloth produced, 200 tons of water is polluted with chemicals and heavy metals. An estimated 1 trillion kilowatt-hours of electricity powers the factories that card and comb, spin and weave, and cut and stitch materials into everything from t-shirts to towels, leaving behind mountains of solid waste and a massive carbon footprint. Where the industry is today is not really sustainable for the long term, says Shreyaskar Shohuri, chief executive of Pratibha Syntex, a textile manufacturer based outside Indore, India. With something of an if you build it, they will come attitude, Mr. Shohuri has steered Pratibha toward the leading edge of eco-friendly textile production. Under his direction, Pratibha began making clothes with organic cotton in 1999. Initially, the company couldn't find enough organic farms growing cotton in central India to supply its factories. To meet production demands, Shohuri's team had to convince conventional cotton farmers to change their growing methods. Pratibha provided seeds, cultivation instruction, and a guarantee of fair trade prices for their crops. Today, Pratibha has a network of 28,000 organic cotton growers across the central states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Orissa. While workers worry about whether robots will take their jobs, teachers are wondering how to use education to insulate the next generation from such a fate. This has worked before. When the last wave of automation swept the developed world at the start of the 20th century, policymakers decided education was the answer. If machines were going to substitute for brawn, they reasoned more people would need to use their brains. The U.S. invested heavily in education, with good results. Workers reaped the benefits through better jobs and higher wages. Economists Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson summed it up like this: the Industrial Revolution started a race between technology and education, and for most of the 20th century, humans won that race.
A music student at the University of Salford who wrote a song in 2 weeks is celebrating, after being featured on a compilation album produced by Metropolis Studios. Pop megastars including Adele, Michael Jackson, and Sir Elton John have all recorded music at the world-famous Metropolis Studios. Last year, the recording studios set about compiling an album called Lost Songs, which features songs from relatively unknown musicians. First-year student Zach Taylor Frey decided to submit his song demo to be included in Volume 2 of the Lost Songs album, which was released this year after he saw how successful Volume 1 had been. Zach, 24, said, "I found this competition when simply searching the internet for song-writing competitions one day and was lucky that there was still time to enter. It amazes me that people who have worked with huge pop stars thought my song was good and worth something." Whether you want to exercise and stay healthy, train professionally with like-minded people, or indulge your competitive streak, Trinity Sport and Fitness have it covered. We've got a dedicated support development team on campus to support every student in taking part in sports. You might want to participate in sports competitions, volunteer with a local sports class, or simply play for fun with our social sport program. Trinity Fitness members of our public-facing sports facility will also entitle you to discounts when you are booking a sports facility and fitness class. You will also get an opportunity to benefit from tailored personal training, free activities events, and lots more.
Herbal is a book of plants, describing their appearance, their properties, and how they may be used for preparing ointments and medicines. The medical use of plants is recorded on fragments of papyrus and clay tablets from ancient Egypt, Samaria and China that date back 5000 years but document traditions far older still. Over 700 herbal remedies were detailed in the Papyrus Ebers, an Egyptian text written in 1500 BC. Around 65 BC, a Greek physician called Dioscorides wrote a herbal that was translated into Latin and Arabic. Known as De Materia Medica, it became the most influential work on medicinal plants in both Christian and Islamic worlds until the late 17th century. An illustrated manuscript copy of the text made in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, survives from the 6th century. The first printed herbals date from the dawn of European printing in the 1480s. They provided valuable information for apothecaries, whose job it was to make the pills and potions prescribed by physicians. In the next century, landmark herbals were produced in England by William Turner, considered to be the father of British botany, and John Gerard, whose illustrations would inspire the floral fabric, wallpaper and tile designs of William Morris 4 centuries later.
Drive down any highway and you'll see a proliferation of chain restaurants. Most likely, if you travel long and far enough, you'll see McDonald's golden arches as well as signs for Burger King, Hardee's and Wendy's, the big four of burgers. Despite its name, though, Burger King has fallen short of claiming the burger crown, unable to surpass market leader McDonald's one sales status. Always the bridesmaid and never the bride, Burger King remains 2. Worse yet, Burger King has experienced a 6-year 22% decline in customer traffic, with its overall quality rating dropping while ratings for the other 3 contenders have increased. The decline has been attributed to inconsistent product quality and poor customer service. Although the chain tends to throw advertising dollars at the problem, an understanding of integrated marketing communication theory would suggest that internal management problems, 19 CEOs in 50 years, need to be rectified before a unified long-term strategy can be put in place. The importance of consistency in brand image and messages at all levels of communication has become a basic tenet of IMC theory and practice. The person who takes the customer's order must communicate the same message as Burger King's famous tagline, "Have it your way," or the customer will just buzz up the highway to a chain restaurant that seems more consistent and therefore more reliable.
Men and women are making different choices about their retirement savings, which could lead to very different investment outcomes, according to Dr. Claire Matthews, Director of Financial Planning at Massey University's Centre for Banking Studies. Speaking at the 2012 New Zealand Finance Colloquium held at Massey University's Albany campus last week, Dr. Matthews said demographic characteristics had a substantial impact on the choices people made about KiwiSaver funds and retirement savings more generally. When it came to funding selection, she found there were significant differences based on gender. Men are more likely to invest in aggressive and growth funds, while women are more likely to choose conservative funds. Males are risk takers, whether it's in their choice of car or their investment fund, she says. But when it comes to long-term savings, risk-taking can actually be an advantage. Dr. Matthews also found that men are more likely than women to have prior savings when joining KiwiSaver. Just over half of male respondents said they had savings already, while only 38% of women did. These figures reflect and confirm, quite disappointingly, the difference between males and females and the level of interest they take in financial planning, Dr. Matthews says. It's important for all New Zealanders to be better educated about their personal finances, but this is particularly so for women. Other demographic factors, including age, ethnicity, education, and income, can also influence the choices being made about retirement savings. Dr. Matthews found that those with bachelor and higher degrees and those in households with a pre-tax income of $100,000 or more were more likely to choose aggressive and stimulating funds. On the other hand, both the youngest and oldest age groups were more likely to be invested in conservative funds. While this might be appropriate for the life cycle stage of older investors, it might not be so appropriate for younger, longer-term investors. With about 1.5 billion non-native speakers, English has become the world's own language. Such dominance has its downside, of course. There are now about 800 languages left in the world compared with perhaps twice that number back at the dawn of agriculture. Thanks in part to the rise of Uber languages, most importantly English, the remaining languages are now dying at the rate of about one a fortnight. Want to learn Busu, anyone? Then you'd better head to Cameroon fast, before one of the language's last 8 speakers kicks the bucket, as the Busunese presumably doesn't say.
Traditionally, mass communications research has conceptualized the process of communication in terms of a circulation circuit or loop. This model has been criticized for its linearity, sender/message/receiver, for its concentration on the level of message exchange, and the absence of a structured conception of the different moments as a complex structure of relations. But it is also possible and useful to think of this process in terms of a structure produced and sustained through the articulation of linked but distinctive moments: production, circulation, distribution/consumption, reproduction. This would be to think of the process as a complex structure in dominance, sustained through the articulation of connected practices, each of which, however, retains its distinctiveness and has its specific modality, its forms and conditions of existence.
Daniel Harris, a scholar of consumption and style, has observed that until photography finally supplanted illustration as the primary means of advertising clothing in the 1950s, glamour inhered less in the face of the drawing, which was by necessity schematic and generalized, than in the sketch's attitude, posture, and gestures, especially in the strangely dainty positions of the hands. Glamour once recited so emphatically in the stance of the model that the faces in the illustrations cannot be said to have expressions at all but angles or tilts. The chin raised upwards in a haughty look, the eyes lowered in an attitude of introspection, the head cocked at an inquisitive or coquettish angle, or the profile presented in sharp outline emanating power, the severity like an emperor's bust, embossed on a Roman coin.
Bones are extremely strong. One of their main functions is to protect organs. For example, the skull protects the brain, ribs protect the heart and lungs. There are 3 types of joints, including fixed joints, slightly movable joints, and freely moving joints.
Financing of Australian higher education has undergone dramatic change since the early 1970s. Although the Australian government provided regular funding for universities from the late 1950s, in 1974, it assumed full responsibility for funding higher education, abolishing tuition fees to make the university accessible to all Australians who had the ability and who wished to participate in higher education. Since the late 1980s, there has been a move towards greater private contributions, particularly student fees. In 1989, the Australian government introduced the Higher Education Contribution Scheme, HECS, which included a loan scheme to help students finance their contributions. This enabled university to remain accessible to students by delaying their payments until they could afford to pay off their loans. In 2002, the Australian government introduced a scheme similar to HECS for postgraduate students, the Postgraduate Education Loan Scheme, PELS. Funding for higher education comes from various sources. This article examines the 3 main sources: Australian government funding, student fees and charges, and HECS, while the proportion of total revenue raised through HECS is relatively small. HECS payments are a significant component of students' university costs, with many students carrying a HECS debt for several years after leaving university. This article also focuses on the characteristics of university students based on their HECS liability status and the level of accumulated HEX debt. Never has the carbon footprint of multinational corporations been under such intense scrutiny. Intercity train journeys and long-haul flights to conduct face-to-face business meetings contribute significantly to greenhouse gases and the resulting strain on the environment. The Anglo-US company Teleris has introduced new video conferencing technology and partnered with the carbon neutral company, enabling corporate outfits to become more environmentally responsible. The innovation allows simulated face-to-face meetings to be held across continents without the time, pressure, or environmental burden of international travel. Previous designs have enabled video conferencing on a point-to-point, dual-location basis. The firm's Virtua Live technology, however, can bring people together from up to 5 separate locations anywhere in the world with unrivaled transmission quality.
Teens write for a variety of reasons. As part of a school assignment to get a good grade, to stay in touch with friends, to share their artistic creations with others, or simply to put their thoughts to paper, whether virtual or otherwise. In our focus groups, teens said they are motivated to write when they can, select topics that are relevant to their lives and interests, and report greater enjoyment of school writing when they have the opportunity to write creatively. Having teachers or other adults who challenge them, present them with interesting curricula, and give them detailed feedback also serves as a motivator for teens. Teenagers also compose their writings for adults who can understand them.
Music is an important part of our lives. We connect and interact with it daily, and use it as a way of projecting our self-identities to the people around us. The music we enjoy, whether it's country or classical, rock and roll or rap, reflects who we are. But where did music, at its core, first come from? It's a puzzling question that may not have a definitive answer. 1. Leading researcher, however, has proposed that the key to understanding the origin of music is nestled snugly in the loving bond between mother and child. In a lecture at the University of Melbourne, Richard Parncutt, an Australian-born professor of systematic musicology, endorsed the idea that music originally spawned from motheries, the playful voices mothers adopt when speaking to infants and toddlers. As the theory goes, increased human brain sizes caused by evolutionary changes occurring between 1 and 2,000 years ago resulted in earlier births, more fragile infants, and a critical need for stronger relationships between mothers and their newborn babies. According to Parncutt, who is based at the University of Graz in Austria, motheries arose as a way to strengthen this maternal bond and to help ensure an infant's survival.
This course provides students with an in-depth understanding of the exciting disciplines of politics and international relations and commerce. Students will learn about the workings of political institutions in countries around the world and explore the complex field of relations between nations. Topics in governance, public policy, public administration, national security, border control, and commerce ensure that students receive a broad and current education in the range of issues which are covered under the label of politics and international relations and commerce. In addition to acquiring specialist knowledge and competencies in politics and international relations and commerce, students will graduate with a range of generic skills such as critical thinking, enhanced communication abilities, problem-solving, and strong capacities to work with others. They will also develop ethically based and socially responsible attitudes and behaviors. Chemistry is an extremely important topic in physiology. Most physiological processes occur as the result of chemical changes that occur within the body. These changes include the influx/efflux of ions across a neuron's membrane, causing a signal to pass from one end to the other. Other examples include the storage of oxygen in the blood by a protein as it passes through the lungs for usage throughout the body.
The narrative of law and order is located fundamentally at the level of individual guilt and responsibility. Criminal acts are seen as individual issues of personal responsibility and culpability, to which the state responds by way of policing, prosecution, adjudication, and punishment. This is but one level at which crime and criminal justice can be analyzed. The problem is that so often analysis ends there, at the level of individual action. Characterized in terms of responsibility, guilt, evil, in few other areas of social life does individualism have this hold. To take but one instance, it would be absurd to restrict analysis of obesity to individual greed. It should similarly be widely seen as absurd to restrict analysis of criminal justice issues to the culpability of individuals.
To learn the speech of alchemy, an early form of chemistry in which people attempted to turn metals into gold, it helps to think back to a time when there was no science, no atomic number or weight, no periodic chart, no list of elements. To the alchemists, the universe was not made of leptons, bosons, gluons, and quarks. Instead, it was made of substances, and one substance, say, walnut oil, could be just as pure as another, say, silver, even though modern. Scientists would say one is heterogeneous and the other homogeneous. Without knowledge of atomic structures, how would it be possible to tell elements from compounds?
Seminars are not designed to be mini-lectures. Their educational role is to provide an opportunity for you to discuss interesting and or difficult aspects of the course. This is founded on the assumption that it is only by actively trying to use the knowledge that you have acquired from lectures and texts that you can achieve an adequate understanding of the subject. If you do not understand a point, it is highly unlikely that you will be the only person in the group in that position. You will invariably be undertaking service for the entire group if you come to the seminar equipped with questions on matters which you feel you did not fully understand. The seminar is to provoke discussion.
Paris is very old. There has been a settlement there for at least 6,000 years, and its shape has been determined in part by the River Seine and in part by the edicts of France's rulers. But the great boulevards we admire today are relatively new and were constructed to prevent any more barricades being created by the rebellious population. That work was carried out in the middle 19th century. The earlier Paris had been in part a maze of narrow streets and alleyways, but you can imagine that the work was not only highly expensive, but caused great distress among the 500,000 or so residents whose houses were simply razed and whose neighborhoods disappeared. What is done cannot usually be undone, especially when buildings are torn down.
At the beginning of the 21st century, the relationship between standard and non-standard language is, evidently, still an uncertain one. We are at a transitional point between two eras. We seem to be leaving an era when the rules of standard English, as elected and defined by prescriptive grammarians, totally conditioned our sense of acceptable usage, so that all other usages and varieties were considered to be inferior or corrupt, and excluded from serious consideration. And we seem to be approaching an era when non-standard usages and varieties, previously denigrated or ignored, are achieving a new presence and respectability within society, reminiscent of that found in Middle English when dialect variation in literature was widespread and uncontentious. But we are not there yet. The rise of standard English has resulted in a confrontation between the standard and non-standard dimensions of the language, which has lasted for over 200 years, and this has had traumatic consequences which will take some years to eliminate. Once people have been given an inferiority complex about the way they speak or write, they find it difficult to shake off.
You have about 30 minutes to answer each question. You must take account of how many marks are available for each part when you answer it. Even if you think you can write more, don't spend 15 minutes answering a part worth only 5 marks. Leave space at the end of your answer and come back to it if you have time to spare later. And if you can't think of an answer to some part, leave a space and move on to the next part. Don't write about something else if you don't know the correct answer. This is just a waste of your valuable time and the examiner's.
This summer, 41 UBC alumni and friends participated in expeditions to the Canadian Arctic and the legendary Northwest Passage. Presentations, conversations, and learning accompanied their exploration of the Great. Outdoors aboard the Russian-flagged Academic Fill, designed and built in Finland as a scientific research vessel in 1989. Her bridge was open to passengers virtually 24 hours a day. Experts on board presented on topics including climate change, wildlife, Inuit culture and history, and early European explorers. UBC professor Michael Byers presented on the issue of Arctic sovereignty, a growing cause of debate as the ice melts, new shipping routes open, and natural resources become accessible. Recommended pre-trip reading was late UBC alumnus Pierre Burton's book, The Arctic Grail.
David Lynch is professor and head of education at Charles Darwin University. Prior to this, he was sub-dean in the Faculty of Education and Creative Arts at Central Queensland University and foundation head of the university's Noosa campus. David's career in education began as a primary school teacher in Queensland in the early 1980s and progressed to 4 principal positions before entering higher education. David's research interests predominate in teacher education, with a particular interest in building teacher capability to meet a changing world. Egg-eating snakes are a small group of snakes whose diet consists only of eggs. Some eat only small eggs which they have to swallow whole, as the snake has no teeth. Instead, some other snakes eat bigger eggs, but it requires special treatment. These snakes have spines that stick out from the backbone. The spines crack the egg open as it passes through the throat. Complementary therapies such as those practiced by naturopaths, chiropractors, and acupuncturists have become increasingly popular in Australia over the last few decades. Interest initially coincided with enthusiasm for alternative lifestyles, while immigration and increased contact and trade with China have also had an influence. The status of complementary therapies is being revisited in a number of areas: legal regulation, the stances of doctors' associations, their inclusion in medical education, and scientific research into their efficacy.
Dog may be man's best friend, but man is not always a dog's. Over the centuries, selective breeding has pulled at the canine body shape to produce what is often a grotesque distortion of the underlying wolf. Indeed, some of these distortions are, when found in people, regarded as pathologies. Dog breeding does, though, offer a chance to those who would like to understand how body shape is controlled. The ancestry of pedigree pooches is well recorded, their generation time is short, and their litter size reasonably large, so there is plenty of material to work with. Moreover, breeds are by definition inbred, and this simplifies genetic analysis. Those such as Elaine Ostrander of America's National Human Genome Research Institute, who wish to identify the genetic basis of the features of particular pedigrees, thus have an ideal experimental animal.
What history books tell us about the past is not everything that happened, but what historians have therefore selected. They cannot put in everything. Choices have to be made. Choices must similarly be made about which aspects of the past should be formally taught to the next generation in the shape of school history lessons. So, for example, when a national school curriculum for England and Wales was first discussed at the end of the 1980s, the history curriculum was the subject of considerable public and media interest. Politicians argued about it. People wrote letters to the press about it. The Prime Minister of the time, Margaret Thatcher, intervened in the debate. Let us think first about the question of content. There were two main camps on this issue: those who thought the history of Britain should take pride of place, and those who favored what was referred to as world history.
Omniscience may be a foible of men, but it is not so of books. Knowledge, as Johnson said, is of two kinds. You may know a thing yourself, and you may know where to find it. Now the amount which you may know yourself must at its best be limited, but what you may know of the sources of information may, with proper training, become almost boundless. And here come the value and use of reference books, the working of one book in connection with another, and applying your intelligence to both. By this means we get as near to that omniscient volume which tells everything as ever we shall get, and although the single volume or work which tells everything does not exist, there is a vast number of reference books in existence, knowledge and proper use of which is essential to every intelligent person. Necessary as I believe reference books to be, they can easily be made to be contributory to idleness, and too mechanical a use should not be made of them.
Dictatorship is not a modern concept. 2,000 years ago, during the period of the Roman Republic, exceptional powers were sometimes given by the Senate to individual dictators such as Sulla and Julius Caesar. The intention was that the dictatorship would be temporary and that it would make it possible to take swift and effective action to deal with an emergency. There is some disagreement as to how the term should be applied today. Should it be used in its original form to describe the temporary exercise of emergency powers? Or can it now be applied in a much broader sense as common usage suggests? Currently, there is concern about the increasing amount of time children spend engaged in sedentary activities, the number of children who fail to achieve minimum daily physical activity guidelines, i.e. 60 min of moderate to vigorous intensity activities every day, and the apparent increase in obesity prevalence as a result of such sedentary behavior. Screen-based activities, including television viewing and playing computer games, are among the most frequently observed sedentary activities that children partake, with children spending 2.54 per day participating in such activities. The introduction of active video games, AVGs, into the gaming market presents an opportunity to convert traditional sedentary screen time into active screen time, and thus increase total daily energy expenditure, e.e. Modern AVGs utilize cameras and motion sensors to allow the gamer to physically perform a variety of actions, dependent on the console, such as swinging a tennis racket or running. The most demanding AVGs provided similar responses to walking, and based on international standards should be classified as low-intensity activities. Whilst AVGs may provide children with a better alternative to sedentary gaming, they are not a sufficient replacement for normal physical activity, e.g., sports and outdoor play.
The 6 programs represented here report that word of mouth is by far their most effective recruitment tool, particularly because it typically yields candidates who are similar to previously successful candidates. Moreover, satisfied candidates and school systems are likely to spread the word without any special effort on the part of their program. Other, less personal advertising approaches, such as radio and television spots and local newspaper advertisements, have also proven fruitful, especially for newer programs. New York uses a print advertising campaign to inspire dissatisfied professionals to become teachers. Subway posters send provocative messages to burned-out or disillusioned professionals. Tired of diminishing returns? Invest in Nick Kids was just one of many Madison Avenue-inspired invitations. News coverage has also proven to be a boon to alternative programs. When the New York Times, for example, ran a story about the district's alternative route program, 100 applications flooded in over the next 6 weeks.
The Cardona Salt Mountain, Montagne de Sal, is a huge geologic formation made almost entirely of the world's favorite edible mineral. Formed 2 million years ago when low-density salt was pushed up through the much harder materials surrounding it, the Cardona Salt Mountain is one of the largest domes of its kind in the world and unique in Europe. While small amounts of other minerals pervade the savory hill, the salt pile would have a near translucent quality if not for the thin layer of reddish clay coating the exterior. The significance of the mountain was recognized as early as Neolithic times. However, it was the Romans who began exploiting the mountain for its salt, which began to bolster the young Cardonian economy. With the invention of industrial mining techniques, a mine was built into the side of the mountain and a thriving facility formed at its base, as excavators dragged enormous amounts of potash, water-soluble salt from the innards of the hill. In addition to the mineral export, the locals of Cardona began making salt sculptures to sell and invented a number of salty pastries unique to the area.
Part of the fun of experimenting with granular materials, says Stephen W. Morris, is the showmanship. In one stunt that he has demonstrated in settings ranging from high school classrooms to television studios, the University of Toronto, physicist loads clear plastic tubes with white table salt and black sand and starts them rotating. What transpires in the tubes usually knocks the socks off of any unsuspecting bystander. Instead of mixing into a drab gray sameness, the sand particles slowly separate into crisp black bands cutting across a long, narrow field of salt. As the spinning continues, some bands disappear and new ones arise. It's a parlor trick, Morris says. Not to deny its entertainment value, this demonstration of how strangely granular materials can behave is also an authentic experiment in a field both rich in fundamental physics and major practical consequences. Yet granular mixing today remains more of an art than a science, says chemical engineer Fernando J.
The best way to experience the museum is from the top floor down. One emerges from the elevators into a spacious hallway. At some hours, museum staff members are giving small hands-on demonstrations of techniques such as quillwork. These activities take place near wall cases filled with objects. These small surveys of the museum's vast holdings are called windows on the collection, appearing on every floor in the halls that overlook the rotunda. These display cases serve as a kind of visible storage, presenting a panoply of objects and materials. Their arrangements are artistic, and their contents perhaps intentionally designed to jar the visitor. For example, the largest case on the 4th floor displays animal imagery of all sorts. Older sculptures of birds, mammals, and sea creatures appear alongside witty contemporary works such as Larry Beck's version of a Yupik mask made of rubber tire treads and metal tools, and Jim Scoppert's Walrus Loves Baby Clams mask. Recently made ivory carvings challenge the common distinction between so-called authentic fine art and commodity, a distinction which may be passé in the academic world, but which still holds strong among much of the general public.
Over 60 years after Amelia Earhart vanished mysteriously in the Pacific during her attempt to become the first person to circumnavigate the world along the equator, Linda Finch, a San Antonio businesswoman, accomplished pilot, and aviation historian, recreated and completed her idol's last flight as a tribute to the aviation pioneer's spirit and vision. On March 17, 1997, MS Finch and a navigator took off from Oakland International Airport, California, in a restored Lockheed Electra 10E, the same make and model aircraft that Earhart used on her last journey. The mission to fulfill Amelia Earhart's dream was called World Flight 1997. Although MS, Finch was not the first to attempt Earhart's around-the-world journey. She was the first to do it in a historic airplane. Linda Finch closely followed the same route that Earhart flew, stopping in 18 countries before finishing the trip 2.5 months later when she landed back at the Oakland airport on May 28. Over 1 million school children and others were able to follow the flight daily through an interactive website part of a free multimedia educational program called You Can Soar, provided by the project's sponsor.
Emerald is defined by its green color. To be an emerald, a specimen must have a distinctly green color that falls in the range from bluish-green to slightly yellowish-green. To be an emerald, the specimen must also have a rich color. Stones with weak saturation or light tone should be called green beryl. If the beryl's color is greenish-blue, then it is an aquamarine. If it is greenish-yellow, it is heliodor. This color definition is a source of confusion. Which hue, tone, and saturation combinations are the dividing lines between green beryl and emerald? Professionals in the gem and jewelry trade can disagree on where the lines should be drawn. Some believe that the name emerald should be used when chromium is the cause of the green color, and that stones colored by vanadium should be called green beryl. Calling a gem an emerald instead of a green beryl can have a significant impact upon its price and marketability. This color confusion exists within the United States. In some other countries, any beryl with a green color, no matter how faint, is called an emerald. Populations can change through 3 processes: fertility, mortality, and migration. Fertility involves the number of children that women have and differs from fecundity, a woman's childbearing potential. Mortality involves the causes, consequences, and measurement of processes affecting death in a population. Demographers most commonly study mortality using the life table, a statistical device which provides information about the mortality conditions, most notably the life expectancy, in the population. Migration refers to the movement of persons from an origin place to a destination place across some predefined political boundary. Migration researchers do not designate movements as migrations unless they are somewhat permanent. Thus, demographers do not consider tourists and travelers to be migrating. While demographers who study migration typically do so through census data on place of residence, indirect sources of data including tax forms and labor force surveys are also important. Demography is today widely taught in many universities across the world, attracting students with initial training in social sciences, statistics, or health studies.
Victoria University of Wellington has conferred an honorary degree on a distinguished astrophysicist in a recent graduation ceremony. Professor Warwick Couch received the honorary degree of Doctor of Science for his remarkable contribution to our knowledge of galaxies and dark energy. Professor Couch is a distinguished astrophysicist who has played a crucial role in the discovery that the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate, a finding which led to the lead scientists being awarded a Nobel Prize in Physics in 2011, which he attended in recognition of his contribution. In his research, Professor Couch uses large ground-based and space-based telescopes to observe galaxy clusters, which are the largest structures in the universe. He is also involved in a number of national and international committees overseeing the management of these telescopes. In addition to his own research activities, Professor Couch has worked to support young researchers and provide public comment on astronomy internationally. Progressive enhancement is a design practice based on the idea that instead of designing for the least capable browser or mangling our code to make a site look the same in every browser, We should provide a core set of functionality and information to all users, and then progressively enhance the appearance and behavior of the site for users of more capable browsers. It's very productive development practice. Instead of spending hours working out how to add drop shadows to the borders of an element in every browser, we simply use the standards-based approach for browsers that support it and don't even attempt to implement it in browsers that don't. After all, the users of older and less capable browsers won't know what they are missing. The biggest challenge to progressive enhancement is the belief among developers and clients that websites should look the same in every browser. As a developer, you can simplify your life and dedicate your time to more interesting challenges if you let go of this outdated notion and embrace progressive enhancement.
Over the last 10,000 years there seem to have been two separate and conflicting building sentiments throughout the history of towns and cities. One is the desire to start again, for a variety of reasons. An earthquake or a tidal wave may have demolished the settlement, or fire destroyed it, or the new city marks a new political beginning. The other can be likened to the effect of a magnet. Established settlements attract people, who tend to come whether or not there is any planning for their arrival. The clash between these two sentiments is evident in every established city, unless its development has been almost completely accidental or is lost in history. Incidentally, many settlements have been planned from the beginning, but for a variety of reasons, no settlement followed the plan. A good example is Curwen, on the Clyde River in New South Wales, which was surveyed in the second half of the 19th century, in expectation that people would come to establish agriculture and a small port, but no one came. Most country towns in New South Wales started with an original survey, whose grid lines are still there today in the pattern of the original streets.
Film is where art meets commerce. As Orson Welles said, a painter just needs a brush and the writer just needs a pen, but the producer needs an army. And an army needs money. A producer is just like an entrepreneur. We raise money to make films. First, we need to find an original idea or a book or a play and purchase the rights. Then we need money to develop that idea, often a reasonably small sum. Besides, to commission a writer for the screenplay isn't something you would want to gamble your own money on, so you find a partner. We are lucky here in the UK, as we have Film 4, BBC Films and the UK Film Council, all of which are good places to develop an idea. Producing in Britain is very different to producing in America, or even Europe, because the economic dynamic is different.
Comparing the intelligence of animals of different species is difficult. How do you compare a dolphin and a horse? Psychologists have a technique for looking at intelligence that does not require the cooperation of the animal involved. The relative size of an individual's brain is a reasonable indication of intelligence. Comparing across species is not as simple. An elephant will have a larger brain than a human simple because it is a large beast. Instead, we use the cephalization index, which compare the size of an animal's brain to the size of its body. Based on the cephalization index, the brightest animals on the planet are humans, followed by great apes, porpoises, and elephants. As a general rule, animals that hunt for a living, like canines, are smarter than strict vegetarians. You don't need much intelligence to outsmart a leaf of lettuce. Animals that live in social groups are always smarter and have large EQ than solitary animals.
One thing is certain, most people do not get enough exercise in their regular routines. All of the advances of modern technology, from electric can openers to power steering, have made life easier, more comfortable, and much less physically demanding. Yet our bodies need activity, especially if they are carrying around too much fat. Satisfying this need requires a definite plan and a commitment. There are two main ways to increase the number of calories you spend. Start a regular exercise program if you do not have one already. Increase the amount of physical activity in your daily routine.